Sounds True presents True Meditation with Adyashanti. And now Session 1, an invitation to let go of control and allow everything to be as it is.
We're going to investigate the whole notion of meditation, of what meditation is, of why we meditate, of what meditation can lead to. And I want to explore what I call true meditation, which, as I talk about it, you'll come to realize that what I'm talking about when I say true meditation is something quite specific, but also something quite different than the kind of meditation that most people are used to hearing about. But first I want to talk about, just for a moment, about a little personal history, and that I came from the Zen tradition. And in Zen Buddhism, of course, there's a long tradition in which the primary practice is meditation. So in Zen you meditate often for hours a day in the seated meditation posture for a prescribed period of time and in a very particular way. And what I found out through my own practice for a lot of years of meditation is that I actually wasn't particularly good at it. And I think a lot of people find that when they meditate, that what they first find is they're not particularly good at it. Their minds are busy, they can't still their minds, their bodies want to be twitching. It's very hard for people to calm down and be quiet. And so my experience from the very beginning was that meditation was actually something that was very difficult for me to do. And I find for a lot of people it's something that's actually very difficult for them to do. So there I found myself sitting, going to various retreats and sitting at home for short periods of time. At home I would sit for maybe half an hour a day, sometimes longer, and then I would go to retreats and sit for much, much longer periods of time. And very often what my meditation was actually anything but meditation. It was a lot of struggle, a lot of trying to calm my mind, a lot of trying to control my thoughts, and a lot of trying to be still without a lot of success, except for sort of magical moments when meditation would just seem to happen. So because I wasn't particularly, I would say, gifted initially at being able to meditate well, being able to control my mind and enter into sort of a meditative state, after some years of trying to meditate in this way, I actually found that I needed to find a different way to meditate because this wasn't working. And it all really began what I call true meditation one day when I was speaking with my teacher, and my teacher said to me, if you try to win the war with your mind, then you'll be at war forever. And it really struck me when my teacher told me that, because at that moment I realized that I had been engaging in meditation in such a way that I was actually trying to win this battle with my mind. I was trying to control my mind, to pacify my mind, to try to get my mind to be quiet. And while some people may be better at that than I was, what I realized was when my teacher said, if you are at war with your mind, you will probably be at war forever. The first thing I thought was, my goodness, forever is an awful long time. And so I thought, I must come upon a whole different way of looking at this. If I'm going to be at war with my mind, possibly indefinitely, then I need to find a way to not be at war with my mind. And without even knowing it, I just started to investigate in a quiet way and in a very deep way what it would be like to not be at war with my own mind, with what I felt, with my whole experience, my whole human experience. And so I started to sit down to meditate, and I started to let go of the idea of what meditation was supposed to be. I noticed that my mind had a lot of ideas about what meditation was supposed to be. It was supposed to be peaceful, and I was supposed to feel a particular way, mostly calm, and it was supposed to lead me into some very deep, deep state of being. And I thought I was going to achieve this by learning a meditation technique by mastering the technique, and then that was going to take me into a very deep meditative state. And I started to find that because I could not master the technique of meditation as it was being taught to me, I had to start to come upon a different way of meditating. And so I started to come upon a way of meditating which wasn't really oriented around a technique, is I would start to just sit down and let my experience be as it is, in a very, very deep way. And I started to let go of trying to control my experience. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes, but for the moment, that became the foundation. That became the very beginning of discovering for myself what true meditation is. And so from that point up till now, that shift of moving from trying to perfect a technique or a discipline to actually letting go of technique and discipline started to inform the way that I engaged in meditation. Now, I think for a lot of people in today's spiritual marketplace, everybody has some idea of meditation, whether you've been on a spiritual path or been in any sort of religion. Everybody at least has heard about meditation. Now, our ideas about meditation are usually colored by our past conditioning, what we've learned, what we think meditation is, where we think it should go. But it's very useful to start out with realizing that meditation can serve a whole array of agendas. So people meditate sometimes for better physical health, they meditate for better emotional health, they meditate to learn how to still their bodies, to still their minds. Some people meditate to open up certain subtle energy channels within their bodies. Sometimes those are called chakras. Some people meditate to develop love, to develop compassion. Some people meditate in order to achieve altered states of consciousness. Other people meditate to try to come upon certain spiritual powers or psychic powers, or sometimes called in spirituality cities, which is basically spiritual powers. And then there's also meditation which can be an aid towards spiritual awakening and enlightenment. And this is the meditation which is an aid towards spiritual awakening or enlightenment that really interests me, that really is what true meditation is all about. And so whether one is brand new to meditation or one has meditated for a very, very long time, what I have found is it really doesn't make any difference what your history is. What matters is the attitude that we engage the process of meditating in. That's what matters. And the most important thing is that we come to meditation with a really open attitude, an attitude that's very innocent, which means an attitude that's not colored by the past, by what we've heard about meditation, through culture, through media, through our various spiritual and religious traditions. But we come to the whole notion of meditation in a way that's fresh and innocent. My experience as a spiritual teacher is that I meet a lot of people as I travel around and talk to people. And I've met a lot of people that have meditated for many, many years, often decades. And one of the most common things I hear about is people come to me and say they've meditated for many, many, many years, and yet they remain, or they feel that they remain essentially untransformed. So this deep inner transformation, this deep inner spiritual revelation that meditation offers is something that eludes a lot of people. It eludes a lot of people that are a long time meditators. And so as I travel around and talk to people, I find that a lot of people are either confused about meditation or disillusioned because they've meditated for many years. Maybe they've had lots of various types of spiritual experiences through meditation, but in the end, often people feel untransformed, or they feel that the meditation they're doing hasn't actually led them to where they actually wanted to go. And I would suggest that there's actually some very good and specific reasons why often the meditation that a lot of people are engaged in, including the kind of meditation that I was engaged in for a certain period of time, that the very meditation we do, the attitude with which it is carried out, is the reason why meditation can often lead into sort of a dead end, in a certain sense. By that I mean that a lot of time meditation does not lead to the state of transformation that it's promised. And one of the reasons for this is actually extraordinarily simple, and therefore it's very easy to miss, is that the state, what we could call the awakened state of being or the enlightened state of being, could also be called the natural state of being. So enlightenment is, in the end, it's nothing more than the natural state of being. That's basically what enlightenment is. If you strip it down of all the complex terminology and all the complex jargon, is enlightenment is simply returning us to our natural state of being. And so natural, of course, means a state of being which is not contrived, a state of being which does not need effort and discipline to maintain, a state of being which is not being enhanced by any sort of manipulation of the mind or the body. In other words, a state of being that's completely natural and completely spontaneous. And herein lies one of the reasons why a lot of meditation doesn't lead to the natural state, because a lot of techniques of meditation are actually, when you look at them very closely, they're means of control. That often the disciplines and the techniques we're given in meditation are given to the mind, and there are various ways for the mind to learn to control and guide experience. And as long as the mind is controlling and guiding our experience, it's very seldom that it's going to lead to a natural state where we are not controlled by the mind. When the mind is involved in control and manipulation, it can often lead to various states of consciousness. You might even learn how to still your mind. You might come into psychic powers. You can achieve a lot of things through a technique of meditation that is basically technique-oriented or manipulation-oriented. But what you can't do is come upon your own natural and spontaneous way of being through a form of manipulation. This would seem totally obvious. This would seem the most obvious thing. It would seem that it would be completely obvious to anybody that I'm not going to come to a natural and spontaneous way of being through inner control and manipulation. And yet somehow it eludes us, right? It eluded me for years. And of course, the fault isn't necessarily with the meditation itself, or it's often not even with the technique, although the technique we use can have a profound influence. The problem usually lies most profoundly in the attitude in which we engage meditation. And if our attitude is an attitude of control, of manipulation, if our attitude is one where we think we're going to master a discipline, then it's the attitude that gets in the way. Because then it's actually the mind or the ego that's meditating. And of course, in terms of enlightenment or spiritual awakening, we're talking about awakening from the mind and awakening from the ego. So, in what I call true meditation, this tendency of mind to control and to manipulate and to be disciplined is let go of from the very beginning. This really forms the foundation of what I call true meditation. And this is a immensely simple, as funny as that sounds, an extraordinarily simple beginning to meditation, which is to let go of control, let go of manipulation. So when most people would sit down to meditate, the first thing they think is, okay, how do I control my mind? That's what I'm calling manipulation. Manipulation is, of course, a strong word, but I'm using a strong word like manipulation in order to get your attention, to call attention to the fact that when we sit down to meditate and then ask ourselves, okay, how am I going to control my mind? How am I going to come to peace? How am I come to stillness? What we're actually doing, what the mind is actually doing is asking, how do I control myself so I feel better? And of course, you can control yourself, some people can, actually learn to control their minds and quiet their bodies through control, and for a while, it might feel good. It might feel much better. But it's sort of when we control our minds and therefore attain a certain state of peace or tranquility through control, it's very like getting someone to be quiet by taping their mouth shut. See, you've achieved getting someone to be quiet, but you've done it through a very manipulative technique. So what's going to happen if you've got someone to be quiet by taping their mouth shut? As soon as you take the tape off, they're going to have a few things to say, aren't they? They're going to have an awful lot to say. And so for anybody that's meditated, I think everybody knows the experience of going into meditation, achieving a certain state of control of mind, a control of body, and it may feel very, very good to do so. It may even feel very profound to do so. But then you stop meditating, you get up off the cushion or off the chair or off the floor, and when you stop, your mind starts to chatter again. Do you see? Because if we have come to a type of meditative quietness through control, as soon as we let go of control, the mind starts to chatter again. So basically everything reverts to the way it was before. So for those who have meditated a lot in the past, most meditators are very, very familiar with this dilemma of, I may achieve a certain state of peace when I'm meditating, but then when I stop meditating, the peace eludes me. So as I said, in true meditation, there's really what I think of as three aspects of true meditation. One of is very simple, is that we're actually letting go of control. That's really the foundation of real meditation. Real meditation is not really mastering a technique, it's letting go of control. This is meditation. Anything else is actually a form of concentration. And I want to draw attention to the fact that meditation and concentration are two different things. Concentration is a discipline. Concentration is a way in which we're actually directing or guiding or controlling our experience. Meditation is when we're letting go of control, letting go of guiding our experience in any way whatsoever. So the foundation of true meditation is we are letting go of control. Now for a human being to let go of control is actually an immense thing. It sounds easy to say, just let go of control. But of course, most human beings, their entire psychological structure, their entire psychological self, their egos, are almost entirely made up of control. So to ask a mind or an ego to give up control, even for a moment, is sort of a revolutionary idea. You see? Because we have to face the fact that there are certain hidden fears, hidden hesitations, that if I let go of control, the mind says, maybe nothing will happen. If I sit down to meditate and actually let go of control, let everything be as it is, which is actually the second part to what I call true meditation. First, letting go of control. The second is letting everything be as it already is. And so the mind would say, if I let everything be as it is, maybe nothing will happen. Which is why we usually grab onto some technique or some discipline because the mind is afraid that if it lets go of control, then nothing will happen. What I'm suggesting in all this is that we actually look at meditation as a way to investigate. So true meditation really isn't a new technique as much as it is a way of investigating for yourself, in your own body, in your own mind, for yourself, upon your own authority, the authority of your own experience, what happens when you sit down, start to relinquish control, and allow everything to be as it is. Allow your experience to be exactly as it is, without trying to change it. And so you're doing so simply as a means of seeing what happens when I do that. So instead of a technique, it's actually a means of investigation. What happens when we actually let go of this control? The third aspect of true meditation, which I'll talk about later, is meditative inquiry. It is introducing a question into the meditative state of mind. It's introducing a spiritual question of power, of significance. And the right question is, of course, very, very important. Meditative inquiry does not mean we're asking any question that comes to our mind. It actually means that we're asking questions of real worth, questions that have the power to penetrate through layers of conditioning to our essential nature. The most powerful question spiritually is, what am I? What am I, the meditator? Because this kind of question undercuts all the ways that the ego tries to control experience. And it's basically asking, who's controlling experience? Who's meditating? Because one of the first aims of meditation is actually to get beyond the meditator. As contradictory as that sounds, as long as the meditator is in control, the meditator also means the ego or the mind. As long as the meditator is in control, then there's very little possibility of moving beyond the meditator, of moving beyond the mind, of moving beyond ego. And this is why in true meditation, the meditator is let go of from the very first instant of meditation. The very first instant of meditation is an invitation to let go of control and to allow everything to be as it is. And this disengages the meditator. If the meditator is doing anything, the meditator is simply letting go of control, letting go of trying to change anything. So when I say meditator, it's important to realize that the meditator is the one that's controlling. The meditator is the one that's trying, that's efforting, striving. So the meditator is the controller, the meditator is the manipulator, the meditator in us is the efforter. And in most forms of meditation, the meditator is very much engaged. The meditator is given something to do and something to master, which the meditator in us loves to have something to do. It loves to have something to master, because then it gets to remain in control. But when we're talking about a form of meditation that actually is relevant in terms of spiritual awakening, awakening to the true nature of who and what we are, then we must find some way to go beyond the meditator, beyond the controller, beyond the manipulator. So a lot of people, like myself included, come from various traditions where meditation is, as a technique is taught, various forms of control, focusing on the breath, focusing on various parts in the body, focusing on, in the tradition of Zen, we often focus just slightly below the navel, often We are taught to sit in a certain posture with our back straight and to breathe in a particular way. So there are obviously techniques and disciplines that have been taught for hundreds and thousands of years. And I'm not suggesting that these techniques, these ways of focusing the mind, have no value or no merit, because they do have value and they do have merit. What I'm saying is, when we start to let go of these techniques, when we start to let go of this focusing, we can start to come into a natural state of being or a natural state of consciousness that often the techniques or the focusing hide from us or obscure from us. When people come to a retreat with me, I often will say to them that I'm very well aware that a lot of people have different ways of meditating, that they have different ways of centering themselves. Some people, they follow their breath. Some people, they might say a mantra. Some people, they might do a little deep breathing. Or some people might do a visualization. And I often say to people, to do so at the beginning of meditation is fine. To follow your breath, if you're drawn to follow your breath. To watch your thoughts, if you're drawn to do that. To say a mantra, to say a prayer, to have some sort of technique to where you sort of center yourself in the moment and in the now. This is, of course, perfectly appropriate as a way of bringing the mind into the present. It's a way of gathering the psychic energy and resources of the active mind and pulling it into right here and right now. So to do so is, of course, an entirely legitimate way of meditating. And yet what I also suggest is that in any given period of meditation, that we also take time to let go of whatever technique we're using. If we're following our breath, we also experiment with what happens when I let go of controlling my breath or following my breath. What happens when I let go of watching my mind or saying my mantra, or whatever our practice may be. So the practices themselves may gather attention into the moment, which is primarily their value, to gather attention into the moment. But once they've gathered that attention into the moment, then the invitation is to start to let go of them. And to start to find out for oneself what the natural state of being is. And so all these old and ancient traditions and techniques, many of which I myself was taught, have value, but what I found is often they become, if we're not careful, means themselves. The means to an end, actually people stay with the means. They end up simply with a discipline. They end up watching their breath for years and years and years and years, and they become perfect at watching their breath. But in the end, spirituality is not about watching your breath. It's about waking up from the dream of separateness to the truth of unity. That's what it's about. And this is often forgotten if we have too much of an adherence to technique. So we might start with a little technique, with a little watching one's breath, saying a prayer, saying a mantra, having a visualization. But my suggestion is always that we then move relatively soon into the living sort of curiosity of what happens when I allow everything to be as it is. And at that point we start to transition from control of mind into what true meditation really is. We start to let go of the meditator. And that's a revolutionary transition. And a lot of people that I've met have forgotten to make that transition, to let that transition happen. They've forgotten that the point comes relatively soon when you can let go of control. And so in true meditation, we're starting from the foundation of allowing everything to be as it is, which we actually start from the natural state. So in true meditation, we're not moving towards the natural state or trying to create the natural state. We're actually starting at the natural state from the very beginning. That to me is true meditation. And that's what I began to discover all those years ago when I started to let go of the meditator, the controller, and started to sit down and simply allow everything to be as it is. And what I started to realize very quickly was that the peace and the silence and stillness that I was trying to attain was actually already there. And all I had to do was stop trying to attain it. All I had to do was sit down and allow my experience to be as it was. So like most people, sometimes I sat down and I felt very good. I felt peaceful. Sometimes when I would sit down to meditate, I would be agitated. Sometimes I'd be upset. Sometimes I'd be sort of anxious. Sometimes I'd be sad. Sometimes I'd be happy. So I would feel all the different various human emotions. But what I realized is as I would sit down and actually allow my experience to be as it was and make no effort to change it, that this underlying natural state of being started to rise into consciousness. This uncontaminated, unmanufactured state of consciousness would start to arise very simply and very naturally. And this was what I would call a very innocent state of consciousness because it wasn't derived from effort and from discipline. And another thing that I started to realize is that this natural state, our natural state, is not an altered state of consciousness. So many people associate meditation with altered states of consciousness. And this is also a profound misunderstanding about the potential of meditation. I say potential in terms of spiritual awakening, to the realization of what you and everything actually is, the oneness of all. Is it we're taught or we assume that to perceive everything as the one and to perceive yourself as one and not separate is itself an altered state of consciousness. And yet it ends up that it's just the opposite. That to perceive everything as one is not an altered state of consciousness. It's an unaltered state of consciousness. It's the natural state of consciousness. By comparison, everything else is an altered state of consciousness. You see, so when we think of meditation, we must also start to let go that enlightenment itself is an altered state of consciousness that I'm going to sustain. Because a lot of meditators know if you meditate hard enough and long enough, you will occasionally enter into altered states of consciousness. There's all sorts of happiness is an altered state of consciousness. Sadness is an altered state of consciousness. Depression is an altered state of consciousness. And of course then there's all the mystical states of consciousness. Merging with the cosmos is an altered state of consciousness. Having the feeling that your consciousness expands is an altered state of consciousness. There are many, many, many varieties of an altered state of consciousness. And most people in their mind, they think enlightenment is some altered state of consciousness. This is a profound misunderstanding. Enlightenment is the natural state of consciousness, the innocent state of consciousness, that state which is uncontaminated by the movement of thought, uncontaminated by control and manipulation of mind. This is what really enlightenment is really all about. And so we cannot come upon this truth of our nature through manipulation. We cannot move beyond what I call the false identity, the egoic identity, through trying to change it. We can only start to allow consciousness to wake up from its identification with thought and feeling and body and mind and personality by allowing ourselves to rest in the natural state from the very beginning. And of course, another point that's very important when we look at the whole idea of spiritual awakening, enlightenment, and its connection to meditation is that spiritual awakening does not come about through any sort of intellectual understanding. So we cannot come to our true nature through words, through concepts, through ideas, through theology, through any of those means. None of those can tell us or reveal to us our true nature. And so it's extraordinarily important to start to realize that when the mind is trying to understand, when the mind is trying to grasp an intellectual comprehension of the ultimate reality, that it's simply the mind trying to remain in control. It's an intellectual form of mind control. And so this gets let go of as well. Which isn't to say the mind plays no part. This is also a misunderstanding of spirituality. The mind plays a very vital part and a very important part. Thought itself plays an important part. And later I'll talk about how we use the mind in the form of spiritual inquiry, because it's the mind which we engage in spiritual inquiry to actually take us beyond the mind. So I'm not suggesting that mind or thought itself is ultimately the problem. It's just our attachment to mind and our looking in concepts and ideas of mind to find truth, to find peace, to find that which will liberate us, is an illusory pursuit. When we let go of the thinking mind, we become open to insight, or in what spirituality might call revelation, which is a deep wisdom or a deep knowing that rises spontaneously. It arises into the mind, but it does not derive from mind. It's the nature of, insight is sort of the nature of an aha experience, an instantaneous understanding. When you go, aha, I understand that. It's not a matter of logical thought. It's something that just registers in the mind, also registers in the body, but has the nature of a revelation. And so to get access to this level of insight, again, we start by letting go of control, even the control of mind, primarily the control of mind, and we enter into a state of being. So in a sense, meditation is the ultimate act of faith. Because to sit down and allow everything to be as it already is, to let go of control, to let go of manipulation, is itself a very deep act of faith. It's also a deep act of investigation. What happens when we actually let go of this control? What happens when we allow everything to be exactly as it is? Because this is the foundation of all of spirituality. Until we can allow everything to be as it is, in the deepest possible way, in the most profound way, then we're still involved in control. So in true spirituality and in true meditation, we're letting go of this control from the very beginning. We're not pumping energy into the ego, into the mind, into the controller, into the manipulator. We're actually letting go of effort, which is a revolutionary idea to most people, that we would actually let go of effort. That we would meditate in such a way that we're not making effort. which doesn't mean we're being lazy or going to sleep, but letting go of control, letting everything be as it already is a means of letting go of effort. And so when I say we let go of control, we let everything be as it is the same as saying we let go of making effort. And we find out what happens in our consciousness when we let go of effort, when we let go of discipline. And we can start to see in our own experience that there is a certain vitality that comes into consciousness. It's almost like a light starts to be turned on within you simply by letting go of effort and control. Something that's innocent and beautiful and uncontaminated starts to arise in consciousness. It arises all of its own and all by itself. And this is quite different than most of us have been taught. We've been taught that to come to that natural state of consciousness, we must learn to control or discipline ourselves. And what I'm saying, in some sense, is just the opposite. We come into the natural state by letting go of control, letting go of effort, and resting from control, resting from effort, in a state of vividness. And so this really forms the foundation of what I think of as true meditation. This is the entire foundation of it. It's very simple. It couldn't be simpler. Sit down, let everything be as it already is. And you can even ask yourself a very simple question right from the beginning. Is it true that the peace and stillness that I am going to try to attain in meditation, is it true that it's not here already right now? And you just look for yourself. And if you look for yourself simply by asking the question, is it true that the peace and stillness that I'm just about to try to seek through meditation, is it true that it's not here, right now already? You come to see for yourself that indeed peace and stillness are totally natural states. They're already happening, and all you have to do is notice it. And then give yourself to it. And find out what happens when you give yourself to the peace that already is, to the stillness that already is. And this is the investigation. Find out for yourself what happens. I want to address some of the common questions that I find that people come up with when they hear this teaching on true meditation. And one of the most common ones is when we allow everything to be as it is, what a lot of people find when they sit down, and first of all, it doesn't really matter how you're sitting. If you're sitting with a straight, erect spine, if you're relaxing in an easy chair, if you're sitting on the couch, I think it's preferable if you not lay down, because people have a real tendency to go to sleep when they lay down. But for me, to be in a certain posture is not the most important thing. I understand that a lot of traditions emphasize posture. The tradition I came from in Zen, they emphasize posture quite a bit. And there are good reasons for emphasizing posture. There's certain postures that actually open us emotionally and physically. And so that when our posture is open, in other words, if our spine is more erect and our hands are not crossed in front of ourselves, we feel more open. There's just a natural sense of openness. Right? And so there's various postures that spirituality has come upon that foster an inner sense of openness and an attitude of openness. What I have found over the years is, although I see these as useful, what often happens in the spiritual seeker's mind is that they get so focused on the posture and perfecting the posture and keeping the posture perfect that it doesn't actually often lead to openness. It leads to sort of a hypersensitivity on the perfection of one's posture. And so it's really, again, it always comes back to our attitude. And I'm always really interested in the attitude. So if we have sat with a certain posture, it's fine if you're comfortable to sit with a certain posture to continue with that. But what I'm addressing is the underlying attitude, an underlying attitude of ease and openness and relaxation. And getting beyond the idea or the belief that awakening or enlightenment can only happen if our posture is correct, because that's simply not true. Awakening and enlightenment can happen to straight, erect meditators and slumpy, unerect meditators who just sort of sit on their couch or their lawn chair or however they tend to be, however they're drawn to sit. Again, the attitude with which we do it is what's important. Is it open? Is it with ease? And is it something that's very simple? In other words, does it allow us to forget about our body? Not to disassociate from it, but to forget about it. Just leave it alone. That's the important thing. Another thing that people often ask me is, should I have my eyes open when I meditate or closed? And again, various traditions will emphasize different things. Some traditions say you should have them open, others encourage you to have them closed. As a teacher, what I'm always interested in is, what are you drawn to? When you take away what you think you should do or what you think you shouldn't do, when you take away the authority that you've learned from somewhere else and reconnect with what's really intimately yours, what wasn't given to you by something or somebody, and you connect to yourself. If you're drawn to have your eyes open, then have them open. If you're drawn to have them closed, close. It may even change from day to day. But what I find is that so many of us have so much knowledge and teachings and instructions that after a while we get so filled with them, it disconnects us from what's intimately ours. From something in us that's a sort of a natural and spontaneous wisdom. And so I'm always trying to reconnect people immediately from the very beginning with what's intimately theirs. What's true for you. So if you want them open, keep your eyes open. If you're drawn to have them closed, close them. And experiment between the two. If you're sleepy, it's a good idea to open your eyes. It helps wake you up a bit. And sometimes you'll have your eyes open and you'll feel they might want to close. Not because you're sleepy, but sometimes they just want to close. And if they want to close, then let them close. So it's almost getting the sense of feeling your way through. Right? So you become very intimate with your own experience. Another question that people have is, because I talk a lot about ease and effortlessness, that people get confused and they think that I'm saying that one should almost be lazy. Effortlessness is not the same as being lazy, and it's not the same as being hazy. In fact, one of the most beautiful and profound instructions my teacher used to give me, whenever I talked to my teacher about meditation, the first thing my teacher wanted to know is it vivid? Is it alive? And this was a very good instruction, because if we're simply making no effort in a way that's lazy, then our meditation gets sort of dreamy and foggy. It's almost like a trance state or a slightly induced drug state. And this is not what's really meant by effortless. Effortless doesn't mean no effort. Effortless means to make just enough effort to be vivid, to be present, to be here, to be now, to be bright. And my teacher used to call this effortless effort. And we all find in ourselves what this means, effortless effort. Too much effort, and we get too tight. Too little effort, and we get dreamy. So somewhere in the middle is a state of vividness and clarity and inner brightness. This is what I mean when I suggest that people not make too much effort. But also, don't let things become dreamy and foggy. Something right in the middle, and you'll find it in yourself what that is. When people sit in the way I'm speaking about, when they meditate in the way I'm speaking about, when they allow everything to be as it is, our natural tendency is to awaken. That's a natural tendency. We are hooked up to awaken. We're biologically, psychologically, and spiritually, we're hooked up to move towards awakening. A lot of people don't know that. And so when we let go of the control that the ego has, the nature of our sense, of our being, is to awaken. Now, of course, people come to me from their own traditions of meditation, and when I suggest that they let go of control and they might let go of their technique, what they often find is when they start to let go of a meditative technique that they're used to using, and they allow everything to be as it is, that initially their mind may wander a bit. And that's natural, because when we've been holding on to something very tightly, the tendency is that when we let it go, it wants to escape. It's like holding your pet dog on a leash. When you take the leash off, the tendency of the dog is to run. And so that's what our minds tend to do. If we've leashed our mind very tightly in a disciplined way, when we let go of that leash, the tendency of the mind is to run around. But if we actually just allow that to happen for a while, it's like letting a dog off a leash. They may run away from you very quickly. But if you just kind of hang out, eventually your dog usually decides that it wants to wander back up to your feet. In a very similar way, when you let go of controlling your mind, it may go a little noisy for a while. But if you really let it be as it is, its tendency is to come back more and more into a state of harmony or a state of quietness. And when we allow everything to be as it is, since the nature of our entire being is to awaken, what often happens when you allow everything to be as it is in a deep way, that eventually repressed material within your psyche will emerge. In fact, it's often the repressed material that a lot of spiritual students are using their meditation techniques unconsciously as a way to suppress material. They often don't know they're doing it, but they're doing it nonetheless. And so when we let go and really open and allow things to be as they are, it's not uncommon at all to have certain suppressed material come up, which can be shocking. It may be, all of a sudden you may have a fit of anger in your meditation, or a fit of sadness. You may find yourself weeping. You may find various memories that will come through your consciousness and reveal themselves. You might have physical pains. People report various pains in various parts of their bodies that will arise when we allow everything to be as it is. The nature of our entire being is when we really start to let go, what needs to arise to the surface arises to the surface. And the mind may not want it to arise to the surface. As I said, many spiritual people unknowingly are using their spiritual techniques and discipline as a way of suppressing their unconscious. And so when we stop suppressing, our unconscious starts to come up and reveal itself. Now, all this material does not need to be analyzed. Nothing really needs to be done with it except allow it to reveal itself. Because what arises, for the most part, is unresolved conflict within us. Emotions that we never allowed ourselves to feel fully, experiences we never allowed ourselves to experience fully, pains we never allowed ourselves to feel fully, all of this arises. And everything within us that's unresolved, all it wants is to be experienced fully without going unconscious. So when our suppressed material arises, and we can allow it to arise without going unconscious, which means without suppressing it, and without analyzing it, but allow it to be experienced in the body, in the being, and just let it unfold, you find that whether it's emotional, psychic, physical, spiritual, whatever, that this material has a tendency to arise, reveal itself, be experienced, and then pass away. And if it doesn't tend to pass away, you can always be sure that somewhere you're still resisting it, or denying it, or indulging it. Which is a good thing to know, because it's the opportunity to let go of that once again, and things can come to a certain state of harmony. So just because we allow everything to be as it is doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to stay, certainly initially, totally peaceful and totally silent, because of course this is an awakening program, right? This is not just how to feel better. This is not how to suppress yourself so you feel better. This is how to wake up to the reality of your being. And we wake up to the reality of our being through our human nature. Not by avoiding it, not by going around it, not by trying to pray it away or mantra it away or meditate it away, but by letting everything within us reveal itself, be felt, be experienced, be known. And then, and only then, can we move on to the deeper level. It's very, very important spiritually. It's something a lot of people don't understand spiritually. It's very easy to use meditative techniques to suppress your human experiences, to suppress things you don't want to feel. But as I speak about it, it's just the opposite. It's the space in which everything gets revealed. Everything gets seen. Everything gets experienced. And in so doing, it lets go of itself. We don't even let go. It lets go of itself. One of the most common questions I get is about fear. And fear is often a very common part of the spiritual path. When people sit down and they meditate, it's not at all uncommon that at some point to have fear arise within them. And especially in this sort of meditation where we're endeavoring actually to let go of control and to let go of manipulation, in most human beings, it will often give rise to a certain fear. Because the egoic mind is very, very afraid of letting go of control and of what may happen. As well as that, there's also the fear that can come from spiritual inquiry, where we look within and see that we don't actually exist as a separate entity. And when the mind looks in and sees this also can engender fear, sometimes a mild fear and sometimes a great amount of fear. It's really the mind contacting the unknown. And when the mind contacts something that it doesn't know, that it doesn't understand, it very often goes into fear. And we're also taught that if fear arises, that some mistake has been made, that fear must mean danger. But in spirituality, it's important to remember that fear doesn't necessarily mean danger. Actually, fear often means that we're actually going to a much deeper place inside of ourselves. So if fear arises, the wisest thing to do is actually simply to let the fear arise. Feel it in your body. Notice that your mind tends to create stories and ideas about the fear, but recognize that these stories aren't really true. And just let the fear be experienced. Because fear is often a doorway. It's just something that you must walk through. And when you are willing to walk through the fear, to experience it, and see what's underneath it, or deeper, then fear has served as the doorway. And it doesn't always mean that something has gone wrong. Actually, in spirituality, fear often means that something is beginning to go right, which means you're starting to go to a much deeper place within yourself. Another thing people ask about is about our senses. And as a human being, we have these 5 senses. And as I speak about true meditation, even though I'm alluding to the fact that real meditation happens within our being, it's not in our mind, it's in our being. So our body itself becomes a really useful tool for true meditation. Our senses, sight, feel, sound, smell, taste, all these are the ways that our body feels the world around us and the world within us. And part of real meditation is getting out of our mind and into our senses. So we actually feel what we feel. We actually can hear what's happening around us rather than hearing just our thoughts. We can see what's in front of us rather than actually being totally occupied in this little drama inside of our mind, this little movie in our mind. We're actually, in true meditation, we're actually entering, in a sense, back into our body as a means to transcend it. But it's sort of paradoxical that the greatest doorway towards the transcendence of form is through form and by form. And so you find when you sit down to meditate that if you can connect with your senses, how you feel, what you hear, what you sense, what you smell, that it actually anchors you in the moment. And if your mind wanders a lot, anchor yourself in your senses. Anchor yourself. Start to listen. What are the sounds outside? Start to feel. How does it feel in the body? Start to smell as you're sitting there. What does it smell like? And you enter into the felt sense, the kinesthetic sense of your being. This grounds you in a deeper reality than your mind, and it also helps focus you in a place other than your mind. So allowing everything to be as it is extraordinarily simple, but it's not as simple as people imagine it is. Because when you allow everything to be as it is, if you're actually doing it correctly, you'll find yourself really vividly present to your 5 senses, vividly present to your body, vividly present to your experience. But if you find that you're allowing everything to be as it is, and you enter this sort of hazy dream zone, then it's very important to come back out of that and come into your senses. And your body is a beautiful tool to anchor consciousness in a deeper sense of reality. Very, very powerful. Now, when I talk about meditation, one of the things that I realized was that our awareness has a natural sense of flow to it. And so when we stop manipulating awareness and controlling it and focusing it, and we just open, and as I spoke earlier, when we open, we have a kinesthetic sense of our being. We're connected with our bodies, we're connected with what we feel, we're connected with not only what we feel in our bodies, but the sense in the room, the presence of wherever you might be. You're actually opening to the whole world within and around you. Now, when we do that, we find that awareness itself is not something that's fixed. When awareness is not directed, awareness may rest for a while. It may just be globally aware, so that everything in your senses are being taken in all at once. The more we relax, the more globally aware we become. We're not listening or feeling the particular, but we're listening and feeling the totality of experience. And so when awareness is at rest, it will often have a sense of globalness, of taking in everything and all experience as a single whole. But then awareness also might move. Awareness itself is curious by nature. And so you might have a tickle in your toe, or a feeling in your side, or a contraction somewhere, and awareness will just sort of naturally, spontaneously move in certain directions towards things. Naturally is the key, not because you think it should, but it has a natural way to go. And as I speak about allowing everything to be as it is, it's not a static state. Awareness may go to your foot, it may go to a pain, a tension, it may go to a sense of joy, then it may hear a bird outside and it may just spontaneously listen to the bird, then it may become global and take everything all at once. Then awareness may quite suddenly become curious about silence itself and enter into silence. And so it's very important to realize that in allowing everything to be as it is, that it's an actually much more dynamic inner environment than it sounds like when I just say, allow everything to be as it is. You actually have to discover in yourself what that actually means, and you find that it's very dynamic, and awareness will tend to move around, and then at other times awareness will just stop and rest in the deepest sense of silence and stillness. But by letting go, we allow awareness to do what it wants to do. And allowing it to do that is very, very powerful. It goes where it needs to go. And that's a beautiful thing we realize. It has an intelligence all in of itself. The invitation is that you, as a meditator, are very engaged in where awareness wants to go, where it wants to go, what it wants to experience, what it wants to look at. You're very engaged, you're right with it, you're willing to go where it wants to go. Now, when I talk about meditation, I am not simply talking about something we do when we're sitting down in sort of a formal way. I think that is a beautiful thing for people to do. In my experience, most people do well to do some time of sitting in silence every day, whether it's 20 minutes a day or 45 minutes a day, or if you're drawn to more, then do more. You may be drawn to an hour a day. You may be drawn to 2 hours a day. Again, it's really connecting with what you're drawn to do. Not what your mind is drawn to do, but what your heart's drawn to do. Most people really do well to spend some time in silence every day. But meditation, as I talk about it, is not simply something to do in a formal way when you're taking time out of your day to sit in silence. True meditation is something that we actually lives with us. We can do it any time, any place, anywhere. You can be driving down the street in your car and allowing everything to be as it is. You can have the practice of allowing the traffic to be as it is. You can have the practice of letting yourself feel as you feel. You can let the weather be as it is. You can let everything be as it is as you're driving down the street or walking down the sidewalk. Or the next time you meet your friend or your lover, you can investigate the experience. What is it like to meet this person when I allow them to be as they are, completely? What's it like when I allow me to be as I am completely? What happens? How do we engage? How does it change? So this is a form of what we could call meditation, but it's also has a possibility of being an active meditation, a very engaged in meditation. In the same way you can engage in spiritual inquiry at any time. You can be eating your meal. Who is it? Who am I that's eating this? Who's chewing this food? Who or what is feeling the felt sense of the food going down your throat into your stomach? Who's having this experience? and not answering it in your mind, but reconnecting with the mystery of your own being, the felt sense of the mystery of your being. So this sort of meditation is something that's available to do, we could even say to practice, at any time, anywhere. In fact, it's very important that meditation does not be seen as something that only happens when you're seated in a quiet place. It's very important that actually our spirituality becomes our life. Otherwise, spirituality and our daily life become two separate things. And that's the primary illusion. That there's something called my spiritual life and something called my daily life. When we wake up to reality, we find they're all one thing. It's all one seamless expression of spirit. A lot of people come into spirituality through suffering. Probably most people come to spirituality through suffering. Spirituality often offers them a certain promise that they can learn to deal with or cope or maybe even end their suffering. So a lot of people that engage in spirit, what brings them into spirituality in the first place is their own suffering and their desire to feel better or to be free of their suffering. And then this is a completely legitimate reason to engage in spirituality, because we're also hooked up to not suffer. Suffering tells us that we're not in accordance with reality. And so although we may come into spirituality through a desire not to suffer, there's also a much, much deeper potential to spirituality. And it's not simply to end suffering, and it's not simply to feel better, but the deepest gift that spirituality has to offer is to wake up from this illusion of separation, this dream that humanity seems to be in, where they see themselves as separate from everything around them. And this is the ultimate cause of suffering. So for a lot of people, they come into spirituality through suffering, but at any point they can start to realize that there is a whole deeper opportunity here. It's not simply to deal with their suffering or manage their suffering, but there is the potential to really wake up to the truth, to the ultimate reality of their being. Does that help with their suffering? Of course, it helps tremendously with suffering. It alleviates a tremendous amount of suffering. But the potential that's opened up when we realize the truth of our being goes far beyond the relief of personal suffering. We start to realize that this awakening is actually the salvation of the whole. What humanity really needs is to wake up from its collective dream of separation and all of the violent behaviors that come from that collective dream. And so ultimately spirituality is not simply about oneself, not even about the enlightenment of oneself, but it's actually waking up to the One so that our lives can be an expression of the One, for the sake of the One. And this is what really a truly selfless life means.
This concludes Session 1 of True Meditation. Our program continues with Session 2.